In approximately 10 days, you'll receive an email to receive your transcript to self-report. If you can't wait the 10 days, we do have a general certificate of attendance you can pick up in the hall at booth 114. And with that, I'll turn it over to Mike.
All right, thanks, Nicole. As the great Obi-Wan Kenobi once said, hello there. Of course, that became a meme after that famous scene in Episode 3, Revenge of the Sith, where the young Obi-Wan Kenobi said it to General Grievous. But of course, the first time those lines were uttered was back in the original Star Wars Episode 4, A New Hope, where Sir Alec Guinness said to R2-D2, well, hello there. Oh, wait. Is this not the Star Wars convention speech I was supposed to give this weekend? It's NFMT. Let me reset. Hi, everybody. I'm Mike Petursky, and it's great to be here in Orlando, in real life, right? Hashtag, as the kids say, hashtag IRL. Seeing people, shaking hands for the first time for many of you. Anybody here for their first conference since the pandemic, out and about? Yes. And for those online, welcome. I want to be inclusive and include you. Be deliberate about that. Intentional is the word, because we are living in a hybrid world and the future is different than it was a couple of years ago. So that's the kind of thing we're going to talk about today, as well as how you as facility management leaders can impact your organization and the people, most importantly, going forward. And I've got a question for you, or should I say this guy has a question for you. Anybody know who this is?
Mark Cuban.
Yeah, Shark Tank's Mark Cuban. About 6 months into the pandemic, I read an article where he said, what are you doing with your quarantine life? What did you all do during that time when we were all, locked at home and trying to figure out what comes next? Did anybody learn a new skill? Maybe get a credential? The Pro FM credential here at NFMT? Or maybe get a new hobby? Learn a new language? Watch a lot of Netflix? All right, everybody can agree to that one. I learned some things. I learned how to open a wine bottle a lot more efficiently than I used to before the pandemic. No, seriously, I worked on my dad bod a little bit, and the funny thing about coming out 2 weeks ago for the first time into a live event was the little elves in my closet made me much more fashionable, as all of my jackets were now European cut. So, very stylish. Anyway, Mark talked about that being an important question, because as we go forward into the future of work, the future of facility management and operations and corporate real estate, things have forever changed, and we need to change. We need to be adaptable, and we need to be flexible. So that's the kind of thing I talk about on my podcasts. And there are two. Anybody listen to podcasts in their regular life? All right. Well, I invite you to check out my two shows. One is called Asset Champion, where I talk with facilities maintenance, operations, reliability, and asset management leaders of all kinds about the challenges and the technologies and the innovations taking place in the world of operations and maintenance. And then I've got a second show called Workplace Innovator. And here we talk about facility management, corporate real estate, the people side of all of these things. But the funny thing is that in both shows, I take it as a way to get to know industry leaders and people in our world, because we're all human beings. And that's one of the themes that comes up again and again. We all have similar experiences. Yes, we're different personality-wise, we're different in our role and responsibilities, but we all have the same human nature and trends towards certain behaviors that we're going to talk about today. So I'm excited to have you be a part of this. This is like a live podcast brought to you by my company that I work for, iOffice and Space IQ. And just for a very brief overview, we merged just a couple of months ago and became a company infused with investment from Autodesk to try to figure this out. This whole transformational time in which we live, where data and people and things need to be connected, from architecture and design through to the handoff to facilities management and operations teams for the maintenance of those assets. And we've got 7 brands. I encourage you to go visit our booth. We got a team of folks over there from all the different products that are CMMS, EAM, and workspace management tools to help organizations navigate the future. And we now have a global entity coming together to try to help you all do your jobs better going forward. So This is my hobbit hole. This is where I am just now coming out of my hobbit hole. I called it that because I was a guy before the pandemic who was out traveling, going to these conferences all the time, speaking in front of crowds, and it was basically a real shock to my system to be stuck inside my house for all that time up until just 2 weeks ago. So for a year and a half, it was a totally new world, but I adjusted to it. I adapted. How many got real kind of comfortable with whatever the new role was? And many of you may have been in buildings the whole time, taking care of those facilities, but it was a nice, quiet place. There weren't other people around, and maybe a different experience altogether. So we got habituated, as the sociologists and psychologists say, to this new normal. But I was, Bilbo Baggins, just being comfortable by my cozy fire, drinking my mead, and getting online every couple hours to do a live, virtual presentation or have a Zoom meeting with my team. And I knew that I needed to get out of that situation and, be called to this next adventure. So, like Gandalf in Lord of the Rings, someone needed to get me out of that situation. I know many of you at home who are watching this online are still in that place. You may not feel comfortable getting on a plane, coming to a conference in person, and that's okay. I get that. I appreciate we're all on a different journey when it comes to the virus and fear and the pandemic and the experience, and maybe our employers aren't letting us travel yet, but I think it's all going to look a little different going forward, and we need to truly embrace this hybrid approach. So that's going to require some inspiration. It's something I do on my show each and every week. I ask my guests to offer a motivational quote of some kind, and I get a lot of real great insight from this guy. Anybody know who Seth Godin is? He's an author. He really knows the human experience, and he talks about that human behavior side of things. And this is a quote that really aligns with my philosophy because I'm an optimistic guy. He says, "Optimism is the most important human trait because it allows us to evolve our ideas, to improve our situation, and to hope for a better tomorrow." So that's great, right? That feels good, and we can, even if times are tough and things are changing and we need to be rethinking our roles and our skills, we can be optimistic about it. But at the same time, Seth says this: we get into a habit and we get into a situation where we believe what we want to believe, and once we believe something, it becomes a self-fulfilling truth. Now, isn't that something we've seen in media and the polarized world? And I'm not going to talk about politics, but human beings tend to get into our different tribes. Seth talks a lot about tribes, and we believe what we want to believe, and then we kind of operate in these echo chambers where we stick together with those that are like us, and we don't get outside of that. I'm going to encourage us all to get out of those comfort zones because both of those statements are true, and that's what makes a paradox. A paradox is a seemingly absurd or self-contradictory statement. So I see paradoxes every time I have interviews on my podcast. One week a person will share an idea or some type of an insight about facility management or real estate or human beings in the workplace, and then the next, I say, that's a great idea, it really makes sense to me. The next week, another guest will come on and say what seems to be a completely contradictory statement. And I'm like, wait a minute, but that sounds true also. Both things can be true. And here are some examples just to help you embrace the paradox, because I don't think it's about finding out which extreme or which polarized view is correct. There's a little bit of truth spread in all these things, and we need to have nuanced conversations to really help us navigate the future. So the most obvious one to me is technology. We all know we've been changed by technology dramatically over the last 20 years, right? We are more connected than ever before, but at the same time, we've never been more isolated. You hear about all these great tools for connectivity and social media, and it's wonderful in many ways. But at the same time, mental health issues and people feeling alone and isolated away from that real world experience, IRL, they get really isolated and have real trouble with it. And many of us are experiencing that now, or have experienced it in the last year and a half. How about this? Knowledge. We can find out anything we want to know in the click of a button on our phone, and more information is available now than ever before, but trust in that information and what is true is at an all-time low. We don't trust the information, the knowledge we're getting. So both statements are true, and it's paradoxical. So I've always said this, and I think it's kind of the king of all paradoxical statements. And whatever you're doing, whatever your role, even if you're not up here like me speaking, where it's a very uncomfortable thing to get in front of an audience and be online and being, judged in that way, We need to be comfortable being uncomfortable. And I'm never fully comfortable doing this, no matter how many times I do it. And it's just that human experience that we all share. So let's encourage each other and inspire each other. And a lot of times I turn to the poets for inspiration. And here's an interesting paradoxical statement from Robert Frost. He said this in a poem a long time ago: men work together whether they work together or apart. How can that be true? It sounds like a contradiction, but no, it is true. We need to find ways, whether we're online, whether we're on a Zoom call, whether we're in person in a conference room, at a conference, in a meeting, we need to work together and be intentional about it. So, where are we now and what comes next? This is the question I always start my show with. I ask the guests, where do they think we are now in the world of facility management and what comes next? And let's start with this guy, because I do love talking about human behavior. It really is a window, a great place to start when it comes to managing our facilities and managing the people and the occupants of those spaces especially. This is Rex Miller. He's the author of several books, including The Healthy Workplace Nudge, Change Your Culture, Change Your Space, Change Your Culture. He ties this idea of the spaces that we manage being a powerful tool to really enable great cultures in organizations. So I asked Rex and many others about the trends going on in our world, and of course the first thing that everybody says when I ask that question is this is the new normal, this hybrid world. We're living it, we're here, some of us in person, some of us online, and that requires us to think differently and to manage people differently. And that's some of the most interesting feedback we've seen or research we've seen in practical real-world experience, and many of you may have experienced this, is that managers aren't equipped to manage their teams remotely. And a distributed workforce is a new type of workforce, and it's a challenge to maybe rethink how you manage people if they're not sitting right there in front of you or outside your office door. Another thing we see a lot is that it is indeed a culture question. Trust and transparency is what we all crave in our work lives and in our experience in all aspects of life. And if you had a great organizational culture before the pandemic and everybody really was trusted to do their job and not micromanaged, things went pretty well in the transition to distributed remote work. But if not, it's been a struggle for many companies, many managers, many people. And we'll talk more about what's happening because of that, the great resignation. But it's pressure for you as facility managers, as managers of people. You've got pressure from above to continue to be productive. You've got pressure from your team below. They're dealing with challenges, and who knew you'd be signed up to be a therapist as well as a facility manager when you took your job. But that's kind of what happens, right? We need to be all those things to all the people. And what's happened through this pandemic experience in many ways is we've developed a horizontal mindset where the C-suite is not that far from the frontline worker, and because of Zoom calls, there was a great leveling out of the playing field, which was a silver lining of this whole experience, I think. And of course, workforces are changing in their expectations. People have discovered, wow, I can do my job very effectively from home, and I don't want to rush back to an office setting and into our buildings again. And we need to start thinking about that in terms of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, whereas before the pandemic, there was a lot of conversations among workplace and facility management leaders about how can we help employees be their best selves and reach those high levels of self-actualization and mission and alignment with the principles of the organization so we can be most productive. But now it's about physical safety and emotional safety and dealing with fears and just cleanliness and the virus. The basic level of the hierarchy is now the focus, and we need to get that set up first before we can even hope to get to those higher needs for people. And we're going to require empathetic leadership. Whatever you're experiencing, whatever I experience, it's different than others in a sense that we're similar. As I mentioned so many times on my show, and I'm a child of the 80s, they call me DJ Mike P on the podcast sometimes because I go and I find musical inspiration through a lot of different 80s bands like Depeche Mode. Anybody remember? Dun, 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 dun. So people are people. Why should it be that you and I should get along so awfully? And that's the truth. People, yes, experience things differently, but at the core, we're the same. So I always emphasize that as being an opportunity to empathize with one another and knowing what you're dealing with, I've dealt with before. All right, so it is complex, this hybrid experience. I'm thinking of it now. I have this energy now going to the fact that there's a red light on that camera over there, and I welcome again everybody online. I hope you're talking to each other in the chat room and you're sharing your ideas and experiences, and you'll find a way to communicate to me after this session, and maybe we'll figure out how to connect, because one thing we need to try to do is face these challenges. And I tapped into the expertise of many sociologists and psychologists and even anthropologists who understand human behavior and psychology. And this is Dr. Tracy Brower from Steelcase. She's a researcher and a consultant who really understands how space is a powerful tool, that the built environment is something that we're caring for that's going to really help us, deliver on the expectations, those changed expectations of people. And I talk about the fact that yes, there are challenges, but there are also opportunities for you as a facility manager, because this is your area of expertise. You know the people, you know the place, you know how people use space, you know what they need. You're empathetic to their challenges in getting into an office and feeling safe and comfortable and providing that opportunity. So let's remember the fact that we can break things down, and what Tracy and I said is that the way organizations are doing this is through, not just looking at the role and a one-size-fits-all strategy for an organization, but understanding each role and department and what people need individually because of their personality type and the type of work they're doing and when they do that type of work. So we need to break it out and have these profiles of what employees need and then plan accordingly. And then we do plan, and as you've seen over the last year and a half, we make plans, and then reality sets in and something different happens. That's okay. How many people remember their organization announcing a return to office and putting out a date of when we will be going back to offices? Anybody have a date that was thrown out early in the pandemic? I remember July 1st, 2020, last summer, over a year ago, and it never happened, or it happened in stops and starts. So our plans and what reality happens is often different. And then the idea that I've heard so many times is we need to be really conscientious about creating equitable experiences for everyone, whether they decide to come back to offices and be there in person or be online with us or be on a Zoom call while some of us are in a conference room and some are online. Can we even do that? Is it possible to have an equitable experience? At first I said, no, it's not. It's something that you just can't replace, the face-to-face human interaction. But I've heard since then, hey, there are some ways we can do it at least better and try to make it a good experience for everybody. And Tracy, being a sociologist, talks about things like social capital, that filling up of your tank that you get from being involved with people in person. It makes you a more creative, more innovative person. Presence equity. While being in a Zoom call, everybody is equal. We're all, like I said, whether it's the CEO or a frontline worker, you're definitely on the same playing field in a little square box like the Brady Bunch, right? But when it comes to half and half in the workplace, half not, creating an equitable experience for those in different types of presence, virtual versus reality, it's very difficult. And that's why proximity bias is a big concern, because if you're in the room with someone and you have a little side conversation, it's not going to be the same for that person online. They're going to feel left out. Again, we could spend a whole hour just talking about some of these things. And as I mentioned earlier, we've been habituated now. We've been through this pandemic experience. Wherever you are on the spectrum of how seriously the virus is affecting your life versus not, we have to be empathetic and understand that where we are is not the same as where our colleague is or where that other person is, and we can't let the confirmation bias that we see a news report or we see the latest research and we say, see, that fits what I believe, so therefore I'm going to focus on that, where there's other headlines that come out and someone will say, no, that emboldens my position. And that's where really the challenge is, because we want to have the opportunity to create healthy and happy workplaces for people, and now we're seeing that our leaders are struggling with how do we communicate that. Do you have you can work remotely for the rest of your life like the Silicon Valley tech firms are saying, or do you have the financial firms on Wall Street's opinion that says you must come back, and if not, your job's gone? I think there's more nuance, there's more conversation needs to happen. We need to sell a vision for why it's important to get out of our hobbit holes and get back to some interaction, because everybody's watching. The world is watching now, and we're seeing headlines and we're seeing news organizations that never paid attention to our buildings and our workplaces and our policies, And now all of a sudden it's headline news at Wall Street Journal and Forbes, and even the main dominant media is paying attention and trying to, suck us in with those polarizing headlines, that clickbait. So I encourage everybody to resist that and just be leaders in our industry and share the story that we're going to talk about more here. Because as Barbra Streisand said in this theme of music around people, people need people. People who need people is something that we all can experience. So here's a quote about leadership, and how do we do that? How do we get people to do something maybe they aren't currently comfortable doing? And I went way back to a quote from Dwight D. Eisenhower, which said, "Leadership is the art of getting someone else to do something you want done because he wants to do it." And I get what he's trying to say here. I like the idea. It's a kind of a military mindset of like, I'm going to lead and command my troops to do what I need them to do, what I want them to do, by making them want to do it, not just me telling them to do it. And that's really, it's a step beyond just ordering someone. But there's something missing here, and I'm going to try to fill in that gap and then share with you a revised version of this quote at the end of the presentation. Because we do want to focus on human beings and having a human-centric experience. That's something that's really come up again and again on both my podcasts. And some of the great thinkers are in the world of architecture and design, and again, furniture manufacturing. These folks invest a lot of money in research and understanding through surveys and analysis of data, how people are behaving in the workplace. So these two folks talked a lot about the human experience. Another doctor, Dr. Melissa Steach from Herman Miller, and Emily Klein from an architecture firm, Perkins and Will. And they shared some things, about the fact that, how many folks have been surveyed by their organization about what you feel you need going forward, whether it's a scheduling question or work from home equipment needed. A lot of folks got a survey. A lot of us were surveyed back in the beginning months of the pandemic, and then they never asked the question again. But the questions have changed. It's a different experience here 18 months later or 20 months later than it was back in March of 2020. And this tension has come forward now. I think we've seen it discussed that we have employees that are expecting one thing. They want the flexibility to work from home or wherever, set their own hours. And you've got organizations that have business outcomes to achieve and goals they have to, sustain. And the leaders are trying to struggle, and we are all trying to struggle around making those two, desires come together. But it doesn't have to be in conflict. I think we all want our organizations to thrive because we won't have a place to work if they don't. But we also want our leaders to understand our needs and what we've experienced, and we've proven that we can be productive no matter where we are. So that's where this whole war for talent and the Great Resignation has really shown evidence of the fact that people just are quitting their jobs or looking for a new job based on the policies around workplace, around how safe the facility is, what the procedures are, how flexible the schedule is, and so forth. And this is the real value of what we do as facility management and real estate leaders. Is the asset is a tool to attract and retain talent, which then allows organizations to thrive, and we can have a big role in that. So, quick story. Somebody shared this with me recently because you heard in the news probably that Apple, said at first everybody can work remotely forever, and then Tim Cook said, no, we're going to have some return to office because we really want to get back. And then they set a date for return to office, and it was followed by a letter of protest from many of the employees at Apple. They said, no, we're not coming back. We've shown we can be productive wherever we are, and we don't want to come back to that brilliant, huge Silicon Valley campus that was built a few years ago. $1 billion plus infrastructure was incredible. And how Tim Cook responded was very interesting to me. He said, I understand, I'm empathetic, I see that you're in a position now where you don't feel you want to come back, you don't feel safe, whatever the motivation. But was Steve Jobs wrong? Was our creative genius leader Steve Jobs wrong when he created this space and invested all this money in a place that was designed to bring out the most creative, innovative part of us? Put us in a position where we're going to have those, serendipitous connections and run into somebody on the way to the restroom or meet in the dining hall, and those sparks happen, those things fly, that human beings, come up with their best ideas in those face-to-face interactions, sometimes unplanned. So Steve Jobs knew what he was doing when he designed this place, let's rethink about how we're going to, take care of your new expectations, but also continue to thrive as an organization going forward. And that's an interesting way to look at it and not demand somebody do something, but inspire them by telling a bigger story and dealing with it in a sense that recognizes that people are strange. Again, you can even reference the Doors here in musical references, or back in the 80s, Echo and the Bunnymen did a version of the song, "People are strange when you're a stranger." Because as the quote from Donald Rumsfeld goes, it's come up many times on my shows, is that we have to deal with what's coming in the future. And there are known knowns, there are known unknowns that we are prepared for, and then there are unknown unknowns, the things that we don't even know what to expect that'll pop up in months or years to come. And as leaders, we need to be adaptable and flexible and prepared for any of that. And when it comes to the behavior of people resigning without even another job lined up, they're just dealing with their struggles, and they just want to get out. They don't even know where they're going, but they just need to get out of their current role because of a poor culture or because they don't feel cared for. That's something that we have a chance to impact going forward. So I definitely think that we are going to be in a position where choice and flexibility is the top priority or the policy of most organizations, and you will have control and your teams will have a level of control about deciding when and how they work. But is that the only factor? I think there's something more to it. It's a more complex problem than that, because it's a paradox, as the conversation started here. We have a book that was written about 15 years ago by Barry Schwartz, and it was called The Paradox of Choice. So if you give people all this choice and all this freedom, we as human beings struggle with that. You ever go to the grocery store and see dozens or even hundreds of the same item, the options available to you? And it's overwhelming, and what happens to people is we shut down. We say, I don't want to make that choice. I'm afraid I'll make the wrong choice. So there's a paradox, right? More choice is better? Well, maybe not. Here's another poet who kind of wrapped it up nicely and said, too much freedom inhibits choice. Constructive narrowness clarifies choice. So as organizational and facility management and workplace leaders, let's put up guardrails for our teams and for our organizations. Say, yes, you have some control and choice, but here's the parameters in which we're going to operate. In fact, I've heard it called freedom with a framework. Freedom within a framework. Freedom within a framework. So we're going to have an organizational framework that's much more flexible than it was in the past, and we're going to give you the freedom to choose, but it's not going to be complete anarchy. It's going to be deliberate. All right. Technology. I guess I work for a technology company. I've got to talk about some of the tools that are available to help us make all these strategies work. And I had a great opportunity over the summer to do a virtual event in the UK called Work Tech. And I had 3 end users. They're facility management and real estate leaders from European organizations. And actually one gentleman was from PricewaterhouseCoopers up in New York. And he gave the North American view. And the other 2 gave the European and Asian view. It was a very interesting conversation. And the name of the panel was Work From Anywhere panel, and how end users are creating ways to work from anywhere. Well, we talked about all the stuff that we already talked about here, and most organizations are not just doing a free-for-all. They're trying to pilot programs to see how people will really behave once given the opportunity to be more flexible in their work. So a few ways that we can make sure that that all comes together and works well is by leveraging technology. So we talk a lot about, and this isn't new, we've talked about it pre-pandemic, but it's been accelerated during this COVID experience, is that Agile is the new requirement. We need to be able to flex up, flex down with space, change the type of spaces available for different types of work. We could use sensors, we could use room booking software, we can test the air quality of the room to give people the information they want to feel comfortable returning. That's certainly essential. Mobility has been proven. We definitely are productive from remote locations, whether it's a coffee shop or at home, and we can continue to leverage technology to make that experience one that is, again, more equitable or more sustainable, regardless of where you are. We can bring you in to make sure it's a great experience as an employee, and we can help you find people, your colleagues. You're coming in on a certain day, who's going to be there with you at the corporate headquarters, who's not. How do we make those connections and bring things along, whether it's asset management or people management. And we have real data now with this sensor technology and other software tools to really look at what's actually happening, not just a survey where someone says, yeah, I'm going to work 3 days a week, or I'm going to come in on this day or that time. Well, what really happened? Space utilization tools and looking at the data can help drive future decisions about how that space is really being used, as opposed to what people, human beings, say. And it may not even be their intention to deceive, it's just we are strange, as we talked about. People make perceptions of people is sometimes not based on reality, as we know. But again, I think the thing that technology can do to help solve that problem of giving people the comfort about returning to an office or giving them control, something they get in their personal lives with their phones and the apps they use in personal experience, there's a gap between that and what's going on in the workplace generally. We need to ramp that up and give people the experience, because they're going to make choices about whether to come in or not and what spaces to use. And as anybody remember, this is going way back, I love music, but even before I was born, Patti Smith sang a song called "People Have the Power to Dream, to Rule, to Wrestle the World from Fools." So we're in this position where the employees have a lot of power, and we need to address that and make sure they get the tools, and technology can help us deliver that control into their hands. And it also will help them deal with the fears. Like I mentioned earlier, there are so many psychological elements to this. It's not just about the virus itself, it's about emotion. It's about, yes, physical safety and cleanliness is essential, and communicating that through technology, this space has been cleaned or what have you, is awesome. But that therapeutic side of your job, as far as dealing with the emotional strain of what's going on in a person's personal life, and why they need flexibility, or why they need to come together or not, is something we need to be more empathetic about. And then psychological safety, if you've heard these terms, psychological safety deals with the fact that, do you feel comfortable sharing what's really going on in your life with your manager or with your leadership? Are you feeling that if you share that you're not happy or struggling, will you still have a job tomorrow? That's what psychological safety is. So we need to deliver on all of these as workplace leaders, because Marie Curie said, "Nothing in life is to be feared. It is only to be understood. Now is the time to understand more, so that we may fear less." Again, some great quotes, and these aren't mine, of course. They're great leaders who have said it, but it's my guests who have brought these quotes to the podcast, and I've kind of accumulated them all here. All right, now these three folks are friends of mine from the local IFMA chapter in Washington, D.C. Lena in the middle, Case and Kelly are facility management and operations management leaders in our local chapter. And I had a great roundtable with them over the summer about how they're actually doing the preparation for what comes next. And as leaders, they have just kind of told me again and again, they're doing their best to deliver the right spaces for people and doing it safely. That's what you all do as facility managers, right? That's your top priority, is creating the spaces that people need and trying to balance the needs of the organization with the employee needs. So it's about satisfaction for the employee while creating enough productivity. The organization is going to be thriving as well, as we've talked about. And they're radically open-minded at this point. They're rethinking things. They're piloting new programs. They're testing out new tools and technologies. And they're trying to redesign and be flexible and agile. They're not usually making huge real estate decisions at this point. Most people are not. They're waiting. They're testing. They don't want to make a mistake, because as we talked about, those unknown unknowns, something could change 6 months or a year from now. But we have to be creative and tell the story. I've said this before, and many of my guests have said, there's no such thing as just a facility manager. Everybody's a salesperson also. You have to sell your ideas, whether that's selling up the chain to leadership to get financing for a new technology tool, or whether it's talking to your team and selling them on the idea of this policy or this procedure and what we're going to do as a team going forward. We need to have that ability to communicate more effectively. And here it is. You've done it before for years. Change management, this whole COVID experience and the return to office conversation, it's just another form of change management. And you all are great at change management, right? You've always implemented projects, and you've created new designs in your space, or you had a new corporate office building that was constructed, or a new policy of open offices or flexible space or hoteling. And you've had to communicate the value of that to the people, because human beings are known for their resistance to change. And it's not that they don't like the result. You just need to tell them what that goal is, and they don't like the process of getting there. That's the hard part. I've heard it said that, change is hard because people overestimate the value of what they have and underestimate the value of what they may gain by giving that up. And this is a quote I've used for years around move management and new corporate strategy or new policies in facility management or new technology tools that are being used. It's all about communicating the value of why we're making this change, right? Because here we are in Orlando, right? Nobody doesn't want to be at Disney World having fun at all the rides, but the idea of getting there is the challenging part. The process of changing from your home environment to getting on a plane, packing up the kids and getting down here and getting through the lines to get to that experience, that's no fun, but we all want the experience. So again, we as leaders have an opportunity to communicate that better going forward. All right, as we wrap up, some practical tips, some advice for you as FM and workplace leaders. What can we do? Well, we need to lead. Leaders need to lead. The idea of surveys and asking people what they want and what they need, that's good, but as Henry Ford said, if I asked people what they wanted, they would have said a faster horse, right? So sometimes we as the experts and the practitioners in this space have to come to these conferences and learn all there is to learn about the technology and the strategies, and then help lead our organizations to what's best for everyone. And then make the case, do it in a way that is effective. People love stories. What is the story you're trying to tell? What are you trying to, deliver to your organization and the people? And understand and be empathetic to everybody's different journey, but use design thinking techniques, because complex problems require creative solutions. And there's a lot of conversation around how project management and design thinking can help us, make that case and share the user journey. But at the bare minimum, make sure you're communicating, because, I don't want to have everybody raise their hand, but some organizations, have been okay and not so okay during the pandemic in communicating what our policy is going to be or is and what we expect. And as human beings, we're all the same in that when there's no information being communicated, what do? We tend to fill in that emptiness with negativity. That's our default setting. That's just a psychological fact that if I don't know what's going on and I feel like I'm out of control, I don't like it. That's just people. So fill the gaps, communicate. And one last thing, breaking down silos. We've talked about this even before the pandemic, the opportunity for FM leaders to reach across to their colleagues in HR. And if you're not already working with HR and IT and even marketing and communications teams, it's a chance to create a conversation and make sure everybody's working together to solve these, what Rex Miller calls wicked problems. These are super complex, wicked problems. And I mentioned my friend Lena Thompson from IFMA, and at one point she said, I come to IFMA events, or I come to NFMT up in Baltimore. There's a big event up there usually, and it's all about making these connections, one touching one, and shaking hands, and hands touching hands. And I said, Lena, that sounds familiar to me. She's like, of course. The great poet Neil Diamond said, one touching one, reaching out, touching me, touching you. Everybody, sweet Caroline. Yeah. Bump, bump, bump. No idea. When Lena mentioned that the first time, I'm like, that's really cool, but I didn't make the connection. But I do make a connection to this great movie from the 80s, one of my favorites. I remember The Breakfast Club. When we were talking about breaking down silos, we were talking about a Saturday morning detention with kids from different siloed cliques or groups within high school. I can definitely relate. This was my era back in the 80s. And I could tell you which one was me. Which one did I represent? You may see me now and say, hey, he must have been the athlete or the real cool kid. But no, I was the absolute guy on the end. I wasn't so much a brain, I was more the geek, the nerd. And to kind of connect back to how I started this whole thing, that's me. Back in the day, Star Wars nerd, absolutely love the franchise to this day, and still sport a similar haircut, as you can see. The bowl cut is coming back. Anyway, the opportunity to communicate with people and understand these kids recognize after a day in detention Spoiler alert, if you haven't seen the movie, it was 1985, you've had your chance. The end of The Breakfast Club, people found out that these kids all have more in common than not. Even though they're from these different groups within the high school, they're people, and people, we have these commonalities and connections, and outside of the pressure of what's, the norms of society and the culture, they were able to make that connection and work together. And I think we can do that too with different folks from our organization across different departmental lines. So I leave you with a recommendation here from another friend of mine in the DC area. You may know Jeff Snavely because of his company, Millicare Floor and Textile Care. They're an ever-present supplier here at the NFMT community, normally on exhibiting up in Baltimore. But Jeff took his quarantine life opportunity seriously, and he actually wrote a book. And he called it Disruptive Discovery, Uncovering the Stuff That Really Matters. And I am so impressed with Jeff. I had him on my show recently to talk about the book. We had a great conversation, and it's really just practical tips around, asking the right questions. Again, we have the opportunity to dig and find out what's really going on with people and what the real needs of both the employees and the organization are. And Jeff describes it really well, and he quotes this guy in the epigraph of his book, that quote at the beginning of his book. He uses a quote from Mark Manson, who you may know, and I said, Jeff, don't quote Mark Manson directly because he uses a lot of F-bombs, and this is a kid-friendly show. But he said, no, this is a clean quote. Mark Manson said, don't hope for better, just be better. And I thought, that's interesting, because I'm a hopeful guy, an optimistic guy, and I also want to inspire people. But he said, Mike, what Mark Manson says is that we have it backwards. He says, be better, do something, the do something principle. Because motivation and inspiration are all the cause of action, but Mark says we have it backwards. Normally I think, let's inspire someone to be motivated so they take action. But Mark Manson says, no, you need to take action first, and by doing that, you'll feel inspired and be motivated to continue on. And that's really interesting because I think that's another human trait. We need to get the ball rolling, and then we get into that, the zone. You ever heard it? You get into a work zone, and all of a sudden a couple hours have gone by, and you've just been really productive. That's what it's all about. So it's a great principle to live by. Let me take another crack at this Dwight D. Eisenhower quote. If you recall, I said, we as leaders have this opportunity to get people to do something, whatever the context of that is. So Dwight said this, but here's the DJ Mike P. paraphrase, reworking of the quote. I think leadership is getting someone to do something they know they need and even want to do, but would otherwise not do it on their own. So what I'm saying here is we have this opportunity to be inspirational leaders, to motivate people to get out of their comfort zone, to leave the hobbit hole, return to offices, get back into a human public space. Again, no pressure on the folks online here, and I know that you have sometimes situations that are out of your control, but when you do get the opportunity, and even if you're not feeling comfortable, how many people felt like you got on a plane for the first time and they were a little bit hesitant about it? I mean, I got on a plane just a couple weeks ago to come down here to Florida, and then I went out to Seattle, and I came back yesterday, and I'm back here in Florida again in 2 weeks, 3 conferences, and it's getting easier, but every time, your mind does drift back to the fear and the risks out there. None of us have it all together, so I want us to be sharing the story of our real world experiences and the value of these in-person experiences, and I know that people want to re-engage, they just may not know how to, or they may need that little leadership nudge, as they say. So, you've already heard a little of my music. I didn't really intend to sing, but I often end up singing because I'm a terrible podcast karaoke guy. But I did have an intention to share one great song to leave you with because, well, it's awesome. Anybody remember this guy? Billy Idol. He was rocking. This is a recent picture of Billy, actually. He's like in his 60s, and he's still looking good and sounding good. Well, this past spring, my daughter got married, and I was driving around thinking about the wedding, and of course, the original Billy Idol song from the early 80s came on my Sirius XM radio, and he said it was a nice day for a white wedding. But I was listening to the lyrics, and in the context of this pandemic experience, there are some lines in that song that are really interesting. Billy says, There is nothing safe in this world. There is nothing sure in this world. And it talks about fear and the fact that we all have to, get out of a mindset of being constrained, because it is a nice day for a white wedding. And as we try to encourage our teams and encourage those around us to return to conferences like this one or return to offices, Billy says, it's a nice day to start again. So there you go. There's my favorite song to be inspirational. But I will leave you with one last paradoxical statement, because a lot of these things sound like they're in conflict, but they do come together if you look at them in a nuanced way. You're going to hear about policies, procedures, things will be set in stone, but maybe they're not quite set in stone. The intentions are good, maybe the execution's not so great, but you as facility management leaders have the chance to listen to people when they say, here are the rules, and reply by saying, we're going to ignore all the rules. So again, paradoxical idea, but I think you get where I'm coming from. We have the chance to think outside the box and really do something special. So I hope that this time together here, as I say at the end of my podcast, in some small way, encouraged and inspired you all to be a workplace innovator. Peace out. Thanks very much. I think I have time for a couple questions. If you heard or saw anything that you want to follow up on, or if you want any more information about either podcast, I'd be happy to answer. Any questions? All right, please come visit iOffice and Space IQ in the center aisle of the expo hall, and thanks again for your time. Enjoyed it.